Welcome, Michael. This is our first podcast. We still have yet to find a name for this podcast, but that's okay. We'll kind of vet through that. I was on a separate Teams channel. We were thinking of some pretty funny ideas, but we'll see what it ends up being in the end. Probably something more formal. We'll see if we can find something a little playful. But I know that what we're really wanting to do is just cover all of the expertise that we've gained here at Anchor Group. So really covering ERP as well as e-commerce as a whole, and more specifically, NetSuite as an ERP, Suite Commerce, or even BigCommerce and other e-commerce solutions. And between the roughly 50 employees and so much knowledge that has been gained over the years, we figured that it's probably time to start just giving a lot of that knowledge away on these conversations. So, and it'll be nice because we've got both, myself, who's a little bit cross-functional across many areas, and you're really focused on e-commerce, and really you don't have nearly as much knowledge on the ERP. And I know that we're thinking today that because you have less knowledge on the ERP in comparison to our ERP team and kind of myself, it might be good just to start on that topic to just introduce people in general to NetSuite as an ERP and ERP in general. Because it can be complicated for people who've never been in the space to wrap their head around.
And I think, Caleb, even before we dive into ERP, let's just start about software in general. Because, you mentioned here at Anchor Group, we do have a lot of, just years of experience, a lot of knowledge between our teams. So kind of, I guess my first question for you in a sense is, what is the importance of software within a business? Right, especially as we think like a B2B manufacturing business, why is software going to be so important for that business?
I love the B2B manufacturing space. Actually, that's why that's where I started. First was in the manufacturing space, and I started in ERP right there. And I've grown to really love the B2B space, especially around wholesale distribution and manufacturing. My very first role was to do an ERP implementation and learned a lot from just that as like an end user going through it. And sometimes I'm embarrassed by how little I knew back then and compared to now. And just my perspective has changed on how powerful the ERP can be for these businesses and software in general. I was speaking with some other team members about just the value that software can provide to our clients and helping them to be able to see the value in what it can do. And many people do already see it, but the way I see it is one of the most expensive things to running a business is time, consuming people's time. And that's what software is supposed to do, is to speed up your efficiency, to be able to do things at a greater scale than that you weren't able to do before. And no matter if you're an entry-level employee or an executive, no matter what, time is very expensive, even on the entry-level side. So being able to leverage software to reduce the amount of time it takes to do tasks is pretty much everything. And companies that are not adopting software faster are really faster falling behind. And that's really what it comes down to, is just efficiency.
Yeah. Now, Caleb, in your experience, what have you seen, talking about efficiencies, what are some things you've seen in your time with companies gaining efficiencies through using software? Like, what are some examples of what that has looked like for you?
Well, let's start on the sales side, because that's where a lot of the processes start for most companies. Is you got to have the sales to be able to fulfill orders or fulfill the product or service. On the sales side, if you're taking a lot of phone call orders, if you're taking email orders, especially in that B2B side, that consumes time. And I would argue that most of the time, those orders don't have to go through a phone, don't have to go through an email. It becomes more change management by the customer as well as the sales rep. And the sales rep kind of leads that charge and helps coach them, some of the a different generation of customers, to use e-commerce more. So I find that e-commerce by itself helps with that. But there's also some other automations. Part of the process for a lot of B2B is they are they're receiving purchase orders from their customers, and then they've got to enter those as sales orders into their system. And there's sales order automation that exists out there too, several good options that I'll often refer clients to. That some of my favorite sales order automations that will extract that purchase order that exists in a PDF through an email, extract that data off of it, and get it onto a sales order. Otherwise, what's happening is sales reps are getting this email, looking at it, opening up their order management system. In our case, we're often using NetSuite, and they're just typing in all that data manually. And some of these orders are pretty quick, but some of them might take 20, 30 minutes. And that really quickly eats at your margins. And I guarantee you, even if you're charging a per transaction fee for an e-commerce solution, I guarantee you that the time, that 30 minutes, 20 minutes, 10 minutes is probably way more expensive than being able to just have an automation and paying a per transaction fee or a per order fee.
Yeah.
And those are a couple of examples off the top of my head. And then the same thing happens on the vendor side. You're sending someone a purchase order and they're sending an acknowledgement. Automation through EDI, the full just fields that you have to enter that drive everything that maybe you can populate from and source from other data. It's endless.
Yeah.
Automation.
Yeah, it sounds endless, and especially if you look at just the headcount within a company. Essentially, right?
Yeah.
Software, as you mentioned, is going to help you be more efficient, and you can potentially reduce headcount or restructure the headcount that you currently have at your business. And so, software also, it's always going to be on for you, right? 24/7. And so your customers, right? If we think about the world of e-commerce, right? Your customers can always place orders. They don't need to have somebody else on the other end of the phone. Now, thinking about specifically ERP software, can you kind of explain what is ERP software and how does it fit into the overall landscape of software that businesses need?
Yeah, because not everybody may know the acronym. Right. It's Enterprise Resource Planning. It is a catch-all term to say basically the software that runs the entire brain of your business. From end to end, from the point of a sales order to receiving cash, procurement, paying vendors, accounting, everything. So it's really the software that runs every piece of your business, warehouses, inventory management, work orders and assemblies, everything.
Yeah, I like how you say the brain of your business.
Yeah.
Because I like how that paints a picture for how critical the software is for many businesses. But Caleb, at what point does a business need to really start considering an ERP software system? How big does a business need to be in order for that to happen?
It needs to be on the radar as soon as you're making $500,000 in sales. It needs to be on your radar to start learning. A lot of people that are starting businesses, there's just so much to think through that they're not even thinking about it yet. And that's okay. It's understandable. You have to make business decisions to start and decide where you're going to put your mental energy in at certain points. But if you can think far enough in the future, thinking about it day one and knowing you need it and starting to understand where they do and the timing of, understanding what they do and then the timing on when to introduce them. From a timing perspective, I think although you could do it before $5 million in annual revenue for most ERPs, they don't make a lot of sense. It is the next layer up when you're evolving as a business. You no longer can work off of QuickBooks for your accounting. You have disparate systems, meaning that there are lots of different systems that aren't connected, and you're doing manual entry. But to go that next level up, to have everything integrated and all in one system, or then have a good solution that integrates well, that is more expensive, and it's hard for people to really chew off at like less than $5 million in annual revenue. And I would even argue that it still is hard at the 5 to 10 million range, and it starts to get easier a little bit later in like that 10 to 20 range, it's definitely easier, but you also miss out on a lot of opportunity for automation sooner. And some of you sacrifice growth for
Yeah.
delaying it too
Yeah,
long.
and when we think about the idea of growth, the analogy that comes to my mind is, in a sense, what comes first, the chicken or the egg, right? Because as we
Yeah.
think about companies need their employees to have time in order to be able to scale, and it's at some point in an ERP, right, can win back specific employees' time so that they can then, right, do different tasks to grow the business. And I think that's one important consideration that companies who are considering making that jump to a legitimate ERP, that's just something that they need to consider, because you will be winning back time for your employees and for yourself, quite honestly.
Over time. Yeah, the hard business decision is it is true that it does consume your time to do a proper ERP implementation. You can't hand off everything
Mm-mm.
to a consultant to implement it. And it does take your internal resources, which is taking them away from other things too. And so it's I'd say an ERP implementation is thinking 1+ year from now. And sometimes businesses are not in a position to think more than 3 to 6 months out because maybe they're in a critical situation. Um, that, yeah, when that happens, there's some scrambling. But when you can think properly, at least 12 months out, ERP always makes sense if you don't have it, and you're in that like revenue range. You've got the cash flow you normally at that point, as long as you're managing your business well. But a lot of times, I mean, it's true. It's chicken or the egg. What comes first? Because a lot of times companies don't have the financial modeling and the integrity of systems to make good business decisions until they have an ERP that's live, not just live, also stable, because there's a period of stability after go live
So with that,
and training.
Caleb, with that idea of stability, what, and earlier mentioned the role of consultants. So talk to me about that, because we know that successful ERP needs to be stable. And that's really
Hmm.
where you're going to get the most fruit from your ERP. But how is a consultant going to help a merchant who's going with an ERP for the first time? Like, what role does that consultant have?
Yeah. I think it's equally as important to know what they aren't going to do, or you shouldn't always rely on it to happen. Your full-time employees are going to know your business better through and through and how you do things today. Your consultants will help you see how the ERP can accomplish their objectives. They help perform that gap analysis of, all right, how do you do things today? And how do I get how you're doing things today to work within the ERP natively as much as possible? And then perform a gap analysis and provide an estimated level of effort to do a customization, which customizations aren't always a bad thing. It means it's doing something different in your industry than someone else is doing. What is the native way? It means that's what everybody else is doing.
Hmm.
So it can make sense to do customization. So the consultant's going to help take your processes and either help guide you on how you should change and educate you on, hey, this is how NetSuite if you does it. If you decide to do things as you do it today, you're going to have some of these other downstream implications that I already get a sense that they're going to happen. And then it's up to the customer still to make business decisions throughout that whole process, and to have responsibility and accountability for when they decide not to change to native functionality. That's a business decision to make, and it can make sense. And sometimes it doesn't. Like you
Yeah.
have to change.
So
Yeah, that would be one thing, is not expecting them to just know all of your business, but mostly they're more of a coach than anything, hands on, right? They
yeah,
are doing a lot of the work too and the configuration because you, the brain of your business is complex. I have people come to me say, "Hey, we're pretty normal." It's like, I already know that that is not a true statement,
yeah,
because every time someone says that, they're totally underestimate how much processes exist in a business. Yeah.
yeah. Everything feels normal to the person. It's normal too, right?
Yeah, when the processes are stable and you don't have to think about them,
Yeah.
of course they're normal.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. So I guess kind of what I hear you saying is that a consultant acts like a coach who's played the game before, right? I'm into sports,
Yeah,
and when we think about the analogy of football, right? Some of the best coaches in football have been coaches that have actually played the game before. And in a sense,
yeah,
it sounds like, what you're saying with consultants, they've helped other merchants set up ERPs before, and they can help you kind of understand the functionality and the limitations of an ERP and what it can do for
yeah.
you. And Caleb, that idea of limitations, I mean, you were mentioning native versus custom. So for somebody who's just starting to explore an ERP and what it really is, talk to us. What are some of the native functions that ERPs have versus what might need to be custom built in an ERP?
Well, it's definitely going to be different from software to software. And I'm most knowledgeable on NetSuite as an ERP. I have had exposure to SAP and some others, but I'm definitely most knowledgeable in NetSuite. So I'll just speak to some native functionality of NetSuite to give a sense of some of the territory that ERP covers. So a full CRM, customer relationship management, where your sales reps can track communications. It's because a customer is tied to lots of things like sales orders. Of course, you have to have a CRM as part of it. Your order management, meaning from the point you're creating a sales order, capturing the transaction like a cash sale, or doing any type of fulfillment, pick, pack, ship out of it, sending invoices, receiving, doing invoice automation, maybe some type of a dunning, some follow-up of the invoices. So that what I just described there is really that order to cash. Then on the procure to pay side, you've got creating a purchase order, which means and when you're creating that purchase order, you're saying, hey, vendor, I need to purchase some product from you. They need to create a sales order in their system to fulfill it to you. And then when that comes, there's what's called an item receipt, which means that you're receiving that inventory. It's now on your books. That inventory, it exists on your general ledger. And a lot of this stuff within NetSuite happens automatically, meaning that when your inventory increases, when you receive inventory, your accounting and general ledger is impacted through that transaction. There's also some other features above that, like purchase requisition, which would be requesting a purchase before the purchase order stage. And that whole piece, then paying of the vendor and receiving an invoice from the vendor and paying them. So you got that the two sides of those processes. And that last thing I just described is what is the procure to pay process.
Mhm.
And finally, you've got accounting, being able to close your books, do all of your accounting. NetSuite allows for a lot of reporting and customization, which makes it very powerful. And you need to be stable on how your transactions and data is flowing, because it's very dependent on everything being set up in a certain way. Otherwise, your books will get messed up. And so it does take some massaging for some companies in the first couple months after go live to really feel like their books are stable. And let me think. The last couple pieces would be inventory management, warehouse, demand planning, and anything from manufacturing, tracking of a work order and assembly and that build process on the shop floor.
That's a lot. That's a lot of native
Yeah,
features.
there's still like several dozen other
Yeah.
things, but that gets
Yeah.
that gives you the gist of things.
Yeah. I mean, the brain of a company is not going to be small, right? No,
No,
it shouldn't be.
yeah.
It's going to be large and robust and able to have what sounds like a lot of native functions, but talk about some of these customizations. So how can you take that native function and extend it to the point that a merchant needs for a unique situation?
Mm. Well, NetSuite has a workflow engine. And then on top of that, there's something called SweetScript, which is its coding language. It's like a
Okay.
JavaScript-based language. So it lets you script automations. Workflows are nice to a certain extent. And then whenever something's not possible there, you can always do it via a script. And it's very, very common to be able to tap into that functionality. And lots of support across the whole NetSuite ecosystem on both workflows and scripts. It's very easy to find people, including ourselves, to help with those types of tasks.
So Caleb,
Let me think of a couple
yeah,
examples.
Caleb, give us your most exciting example. Like when was a unique situation that you and your team was legitimately excited to work on and built out some cool functionality for a merchant?
Recently, I think one of them was that sales order automation I alluded to earlier, where we we took an email coming into NetSuite. Well, we said, hey, customer, you can either create a forwarding rule when you receive this from your customer for with that purchase order. We have a forwarding rule that pushes it to a NetSuite email and there's two ways that data can exist. It can be within the body of an email, like that main description area, or it can be as an attachment. In this case, all that information for the purchase order was coming in as a body of the email. And what we did is we said, all right, now we can get that text and it's coming in a consistent way. And these were getting hundreds of orders a day of these from this one customer. And they would get these and need to create a bunch of sales orders, and they needed to fulfill them fast because they're in the food space. And they needed to fulfill them and get them delivered to the customer the next day because of how fresh the goods needed to be. And what we did is we took some techniques to extract that off of that body of the email, parse it, meaning thinking you got a word "the" and you parse the letters to THE. So you can parse that information. And in that body of that email was information like the item SKU, the quantity that they wanted to purchase. That information existed within the body of the email. So we were able to extract that and then create a sales order, inserting each of those lines for that customer, and then be able to process it. It was a little bit of a unique scenario. There's other techniques to do that same thing too. You can leverage EDI in some cases. This particular customer of theirs was not sophisticated enough to allow for EDI.
Okay.
And that's why that was kind of eliminated as an option because their customer wasn't sophisticated enough for that. So, or didn't allow it or whatever the customer's reasoning was.
Yeah.
And we had to just think outside the box, found a pain point, and figured out a way to resolve it, provide an estimated level of effort to decide whether it's worthwhile to solve that pain point. And in this case, it certainly was.
Sounds like it, yeah.
Saved hours and hours every day of work.
Yeah, yeah. And so it sounds like there's an example of where when you're optimizing your software for your needs, there's a way that you can alleviate that pain and save your time, save your team time.
Yeah.
And so
I'm going to make a bold statement.
Yeah, let's hear it.
As far as I know, we've never not been able to solve something.
Yeah, because that was going to be a follow-up question. I'm like, okay, so you work with NetSuite. How far can you actually extend the limits of NetSuite?
Like crazy far. And I think that there's certainly some discussions to make where you'd say, well, the ROI might not make sense. It's more of a budget question that makes sense in some cases. That's really what it comes down to is a discussion on budget and then a prioritization of that expense at that moment in time. And I like to go through our managed services onboarding flow. And part of that is just identifying a bunch of pain points and prioritizing the ones we want to hit first and just go through and start knocking them out.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now, question for you. At this point, it sounds like the ERP is on the operational side of the business. Now, being at the company here, Anchor Group, I'm on the e-commerce side of things. So I'm thinking front end, what customers interact with, the way that a company can capture sales and captivate an audience in that process through their website. So talk to us now, what is the relationship between an ERP and even specifically NetSuite? What's the relationship between the NetSuite ERP and an e-commerce store?
Well, the ERP is the back office. The customer is never going to be logged into the ERP. It's your software that's running the business on the office side. That's the way you can think about it. Where the e-commerce is your digital storefront. It's the it's the storefront that, you're not in the retail space, but you allow for them to walk around and explore and shop and learn about your business. E-commerce is more marketing focused. It is sales, but sales and marketing, I suppose, but
Right.
definitely more marketing focus is that front end. And the ERP is entirely the back office from the point that they create an order. There are some other, I also think about e-commerce different than most people because we do so much in that B2B e-commerce space in addition to B2C. The e-commerce, relabel it as customer portal, and in some cases, a customer portal equals traditional e-commerce. But in other cases, a customer portal could mean that getting more data to their customer My Account that they're logging in, that is surfacing it from the ERP. And there's reasons why I like BigCommerce and some other e-commerce solutions like SweetCommerce. And I love analyzing customer support calls to see what are the common things people are wishing are asking about that exist. Like all the customer support rep is doing is looking in the ERP to figure out like what happened with the order, what can they do to support. And many of those use cases can be solved with a good customer portal. It could be reorder, it could be returns, it could be there's something called a saved search in NetSuite. You could surface saved searches to My Account of SweetCommerce, and just changing your perspective to e-commerce being more than e-commerce. It's a customer portal, and all the data that drives it is in the ERP.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that's important to note is that all the information's in the ERP, but it's surfaced in the e-commerce, whether you want to think about if you have more of a marketing mindset, right? You might truly think of that as an e-commerce website. Whereas if you're more on the sales side, think about a customer portal. And I see what you're saying. Ultimately, when it comes down to it, right, it's just a little bit of a difference in semantics, whether we're calling it a
Yeah.
customer portal or an e-commerce website. Regardless, customers are logging on, finding the information they're looking for about your products and purchasing them on that. So one thing I think it's
Yeah.
important to note is that the relationship between the two is going to be critical. Because when you have an ERP on the back end, that's the brain of your company, the brain of your organization. You need that to connect to your front end, whether it's customer portal, you're calling it, or an e-commerce website. And I think it's important to note within the world of NetSuite and just ERPs in general, there are integrations you can get to connect the two, where you can literally say, hey, ERP side, I need you to take this data point, say, for example, some piece of product data, and I need you to carry it over via the integration into your e-commerce storefront. And that's a piece that I think when I speak with people, that's a piece that kind of gets swept under the rug or pushed on the back burner. But it's something you need to keep in mind as you're considering an ERP system or if you're considering an e-commerce system, because ultimately you need to make sure the two marry together really well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I integrations are really critical to any business because you will have some systems that you don't want to customize or there's always point solutions that exist out there that provide a lot of value to businesses that they want to continue to do because it solves a very specific thing in a very high quality manner, and it can make sense to integrate those things.
Yeah, and it's so important. It's critical. Now, I guess one last question that I think it's important for you, Caleb, and to get your perspective on is, you've mentioned your experience in NetSuite and Anchor Group's experience in NetSuite. So, what type of merchants does NetSuite work really well for? Say somebody's trying to explore options. How do they know if NetSuite's going to be the right fit for them?
Well, it's the oldest cloud-based ERP in the late 90s is when it was founded. And, with that, it's evolved. It's one of the most mature ERPs out there that's cloud-based specifically for that mid-market space. And that means that they've created solutions and native functionality and modules for every vertical, really. I think that there's different pairs of modules that are designed for certain verticals. Like There's going to be more, if you're a software company that sells subscriptions, one of them might be some more revenue recognition rules and doing lots more around that, and subscription management. That might be the types of modules, something called suite billing. And then there's some other third-party subscription solutions out there too as options in the marketplace. And then they're in the wholesale distribution space, you're going to have more offerings that are structured with more of a product space edition of NetSuite. That's going to have more advanced inventory management functionality, maybe demand planning. If you're a manufacturing company, then you're going to have WIP and routing, work orders and assemblies, those types of scenarios. So there's retail, there's high tech, general business, really a lot of different verticals that are covered. And NetSuite just creates different editions of their product offerings and all their modules, pair them together for certain verticals. So, yeah, hopefully that kind of answers that.
Yeah, Caleb, when you sign up for NetSuite and when you work with them over there, do they essentially pick out those different modules specifically for you, or do they already have, say you're a B2C retailer, right, of apparel?
Mm-hmm.
Will they already have like a preset group so that you say, hey, here's my company, here's what we do, and then they kind of have something already prepackaged for you, or are you working with their folks to like essentially build out the functionality you need in NetSuite?
Yeah, oftentimes when clients are coming to us, they're wanting to get a demo of NetSuite, and so they'll reach out, talk to us. We'll understand their business a little bit, give them a lay of the land, kind of give them a heads up on what the sales cycle looks like, what are the next steps. We'll walk through the whole demos with them to scope out the project, and at the same time, we're gathering requirements. They're going to be explaining their business, and we'll explain how NetSuite solves that. And whenever I say, yeah, we can solve that with NetSuite, and it utilizes a module specifically, I'm making a note so that when we're doing a presentation of like the final pricing and the solution recommendation, I've already selected out all the additions, any add-on modules that I'm mapping them out on their behalf on what they need. It would be I don't think you could very effectively self-shop for the number of modules and like sift through them all, because if you recall earlier when you're asking me about the ERP, just explain it as a whole, I scratched the surface and I said a lot of things already. So I think that there's dozens of things to try and, can you imagine sifting through that many modules by yourself? That'd be really tough. And that's why we exist on the sales cycle, to not only scope the implementation, but also make sure they select the right modules for their requirements.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Caleb, for sharing your knowledge and understanding of ERP systems, why they are important for businesses, and also specifically about NetSuite. That's some interesting stuff, and I'm sure some people out there are going to benefit from that knowledge.
Yeah. This was a first. Since this was kind of our first podcast, it was fun just to go back and forth, start from a foundational level of ERP, and I anticipate we'll go into much further detail on just the e-commerce strategies, B2B, B2C, ERP as a whole, because there's so much to learn. And I've realized the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know. And it's a journey. And I fully expect my whole career to be learning in an ERP. There's just so much information and to slowly learn and accumulate. And this is just me brain dumping wherever possible, interviewing other people who know more about certain areas of NetSuite, and so we can share it for the whole ecosystem, help people expedite their own knowledge growth.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Great. Well, we'll see you on the next one, Michael, and we'll get prepped for that next one soon.
That's right. We'll see you then.